In the underworld of organized crime, few names carry as much weight as Louis Mélou Roy. A key player in the Hells Angels, Roy was one of the most influential and wealthy figures in Quebec's criminal scene. But his rise to power came with plenty of enemies, both inside and outside the club. On June 23, 2000, Roy vanished without a trace, setting off a storm of speculation that still lingers today. Was it a betrayal, a power struggle, or something even darker? In this video, we dive into the mysterious disappearance of Louis Roy, a story full of danger, intrigue, and gruesome details that will make you question what really happened. Stay tuned to find out. Louis Mélou Roy was more than just another member of the Hells Angels in Quebec. He was a major figure in the criminal world, rising through the ranks to become one of the wealthiest and most influential members in the organization. Born in the late 1950s, Roy was known for his keen business sense, particularly in the drug trade. He wasn't just involved in the everyday street-level operations, but was deeply embedded in the network of the Hells Angels, taking part in some of the most profitable and dangerous criminal activities. Roy's rise to prominence came through his operations in drug trafficking, specifically cocaine. In the late 90s, the Hells Angels were already well established as a dominant force in Quebec's underworld. Their control over large portions of the drug trade made them a target for rivals, but it also gave them power and wealth beyond what most people could imagine. Roy, with his sharp mind for business, quickly made a name for himself as one of the wealthiest figures in the club. He wasn't just a foot soldier. He was in a position of authority, rubbing elbows with the most powerful people in the criminal world. He was also a key player in the Hells Angels Nomads chapter, which operated across Canada. The Nomads weren't just a part of the Hells Angels, they were considered the elite, trusted with handling sensitive operations. Roy's status within this group was undeniable, and it granted him significant influence. As Roy became more influential, he began to make enemies. His involvement in the drug trade, especially his dealings in cocaine, didn't sit well with everyone, especially not with Maurice Mom Boucher, the head of the Hells Angels in Quebec. Despite the trouble that followed him, Roy felt untouchable. As a founding member of the Nomads chapter, he believed that his status gave him immunity. But the criminal world isn't forgiving, and it doesn't always work on the rules you think it does. Roy was about to find that out, the hard way. To understand the weight of Louis Roy's life and actions, it's important to understand the Hells Angels' role in Quebec. The Hells Angels have always been one of the most infamous motorcycle gangs in the world. Originally founded in California in 1948, the club expanded internationally and soon set its sights on Quebec. By the late 1970s, the Hells Angels had a firm grip on the province's criminal scene, particularly when it came to drug trafficking, extortion, and even murder. In Quebec, the Hells Angels weren't just a gang. They were the driving force behind organized crime. The provincial capital, Montreal, became their stronghold, and from there, they controlled vast operations that spanned across Canada and into the United States. By the time Roy became involved in the club, the Hells Angels were already a dominant force, but they weren't without competition. They had rival gangs, most notably the Rock Machine, with whom they engaged in a bloody war for control of the drug trade in Quebec. At the center of this conflict were powerful figures like Roy and Boucher. Boucher, known as Mom, was the leader of the Hells Angels in Quebec, a brutal and ruthless man whose influence stretched throughout the province. His leadership was marked by a willingness to do whatever was necessary to maintain control, including murder, intimidation, and manipulation. For Boucher, loyalty to the club was everything, and anyone who didn't follow his orders or upset the balance was seen as a threat. Roy's role in the Hells Angels was primarily tied to his involvement in the cocaine business. The Hells Angels were notorious for controlling the trade of illegal drugs, including cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. But in Quebec, cocaine was where the real money was. Roy's dealings were so successful that he became one of the wealthiest men in the gang, if not the wealthiest, at least in the province. However, it wasn't just the money that made him valuable. It was his connections and his ability to get things done. But Roy's rise wasn't without its challenges. While he had the loyalty of many members, he also had enemies within the club. This included Maurice Boucher, the man who would eventually orchestrate Roy's disappearance. At the core of their tensions was Roy's behavior when it came to drug pricing. Unlike other members of the Hells Angels, who stuck to the strict pricing structures put in place by Boucher, Roy had a habit of underpricing cocaine, Selling cocaine for less than the $50,000 per kilogram that was the standard at the time didn't sit well with Boucher or the mafia. It angered the wrong people, those who didn't take kindly to anyone stepping out of line. This conflict between Roy and Boucher wasn't just about money. The Hells Angels were at war with the rock machine and needed to keep their operations smooth and profitable. Underpricing was seen as undermining their efforts. The price of cocaine was more than just a number. It was a symbol of power and dominance in the criminal underworld. Despite the growing tensions, Roy wasn't someone who was easily intimidated. His confidence came from his position in the club, and his belief that, as a founding member of the Nomads chapter, he was untouchable. However, the rules of the game were changing, and Roy was about to find out that even the most powerful figures in the underworld aren't immune to betrayal. As we move forward, we'll take a closer look at the moment when everything came crashing down for Louis Roy. What happened on June 23, 2000, would forever change the course of his life, and the Hells Angels in Quebec. But was it just another act of betrayal, or was there something even more sinister at play? Stay with us as we explore the events leading to Roy's mysterious disappearance. As Louis Roy's influence in the Hells Angels grew, so did the tensions between him and Maurice Boucher, the leader of the Hells Angels in Quebec. Boucher, a ruthless figure in the world of organized crime, wasn't someone who tolerated dissent. He had a strict set of rules, and anyone who didn't follow them faced severe consequences. Unfortunately for Roy, he didn't always play by Boucher's rules. One of the main issues between the two men was Roy's handling of the drug trade. Roy had a tendency to undercut prices, particularly when it came to cocaine. In the world of the Hells Angels, drugs were big business, and pricing was everything. Selling cocaine for less than the established price of $50,000 per kilogram was not just a financial loss, it was a challenge to Boucher's authority. It was a direct insult to the organized structure Boucher had worked hard to establish. Roy's actions angered not just Boucher, but also the powerful mafia figures who had strong ties with the Hells Angels, especially the Rizzuto family. In the criminal world, loyalty to your superiors and the system is everything, and Roy's pricing decisions started to rub people the wrong way. Boucher, a man known for his cruelty and determination, didn't tolerate anyone stepping out of line, even if they were as influential as Roy. Roy's refusal to join Boucher's inner circle, La Table, only made things worse. Boucher saw this as a sign of disrespect and disloyalty. For Roy, it was about maintaining independence, but for Boucher, it was a threat to his leadership. As tensions escalated, the divide between the two men became even more apparent. Roy's refusal to fall in line with Boucher's rules, combined with his growing influence in the drug trade, made him a target. In the cutthroat world of the Hells Angels, betrayal is often punished with death, and as we'll see, it was only a matter of time before Roy's actions caught up with him. June 23, 2000, marked a dark day in the history of the Hells Angels in Quebec. On this day, Louis Roy disappeared. One moment, he was attending a party at the home of Maurice Boucher's father, and the next, he was gone. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance immediately raised suspicions, and rumors began to swirl. For those who knew Roy, his sudden disappearance seemed almost impossible to believe. Roy wasn't someone who would just vanish without a trace, especially given his prominence in the Hells Angels. But the truth was far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. It didn't take long for people to connect the dots between Roy's disappearance and the growing conflict with Boucher. It became clear that Roy's fate had likely been sealed long before that fateful evening. At the party, it's believed that Roy was lured into a trap. Some say he was tricked into believing that the gathering was a peaceful family event, but it was anything but. The reality was that he was walking straight into the hands of those who had decided his time had come. There are multiple theories about what exactly happened next, but the one that has gained the most traction suggests that Roy was taken to a meat processing plant. It was here that his life would come to a brutal end. The theory of his murder at the meat plant became widely accepted when sources close to the Hells Angels and Mafia began to speak out. One of the most chilling revelations came from Andrea Scappa, a former member of the Mafia, who claimed that Roy was killed in a way that was both gruesome and symbolic. According to Scappa, Roy's body was dismembered and disposed of in a manner that left no trace. It was said that Roy was run through a meat grinder. Despite the gruesome nature of the story, It painted a picture of just how far the Hells Angels and their allies in the Mafia would go to eliminate anyone they saw as a threat. It was a message to anyone who might think they could defy the organization and live to tell the tale. Roy's death was not just about revenge for underpricing drugs or disrespecting Boucher. It was a cold reminder that in the criminal world, betrayal is often met with the most brutal consequences. Roy's body was never found, and to this day, the exact details of his death remain unclear. Some believe the story of the meat grinder is nothing more than a rumor, but others argue that it's the brutal truth. What is certain, however, is that Roy's disappearance marked the end of a chapter in the Hells Angels story, a chapter filled with power, betrayal, and violence. So, what really happened to Louis Roy that night? Was he truly run through a meat grinder? In the next chapter, we'll dive deeper into the aftermath of his disappearance and explore how his death sent shockwaves through the criminal world. The mystery of Roy's fate is still a topic of discussion today, but what it ultimately reveals about loyalty, power, and betrayal in the world of organized crime is chilling. The disappearance of Louis Roy shook the very core of the Hells Angels in Quebec, but what followed was even more chilling. While many believed Roy was simply killed, the real horror came from the gruesome nature of his death, and the story behind it would send shockwaves through the underworld. Roy's murder wasn't just another hit in the world of organized crime, it was a brutal message. In the months following his disappearance, rumors began to spread. One story in particular became widely accepted, that Roy had been killed in a meat processing plant, and his body disposed of in a horrific manner. According to various sources close to the criminal world, Roy didn't just meet a violent death, he was literally run through a meat grinder. This wasn't some random rumor or exaggeration. Andrea Scappa, a former mafia figure, later confirmed this in his book, claiming that Roy was indeed murdered in this gruesome fashion. Scappa explained that Roy's body was dismembered and processed like meat, leaving absolutely no trace behind. It was a chilling way of making sure Roy's disappearance would remain a mystery. According to Scappa, this wasn't just about eliminating Roy. It was about sending a brutal message to anyone who dared to defy the Hells Angels and their mafia ties. This act of violence wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. The choice of a meat processing plant wasn't random. It sent a clear message to the criminal world that betrayal would be dealt with in the most violent and dehumanizing way possible. The method of disposal, along with the secrecy surrounding Roy's disappearance, made it clear that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about making sure no one else dared to challenge Boucher's leadership. The story of the meat grinder was terrifying, but it also painted a picture of how far the Hells Angels were willing to go to maintain their power. Some doubted the details, but in the criminal world, these kinds of stories aren't easily dismissed. The Hells Angels were known for their brutality, and Roy's death became a symbol of their uncompromising nature. His murder sent a message to anyone who might think about crossing them, and the horrific details ensured that Roy's fate would be remembered for years to come. Though Roy's body was never found, the story of how he died became a key piece of the puzzle. The fact that he was never given a proper burial, that his death was so brutal, only added to the mystery surrounding his disappearance. But one thing was clear, the man who had once been one of the most powerful members of the Hells Angels was gone, and his violent end would leave a lasting scar on the criminal landscape in Quebec. The death of Louis Roy didn't just mark the end of a man's life, it signaled a shift in the criminal underworld of Quebec. The immediate aftermath of Roy's murder sent shockwaves through both the Hells Angels and their allies in the Mafia. His violent death was a stark reminder of the unforgiving nature of organized crime, and it marked the beginning of an unsettling period for those close to the Hells Angels. For Boucher, Roy's death was a clear message to anyone who might challenge his authority. Boucher's leadership had always been marked by an iron fist, and his ability to eliminate threats, even those as powerful as Roy, reinforced his control over the Hells Angels. Boucher had made an example of Roy, and in the process, he solidified his position at the top. But while Roy's death strengthened Boucher's grip on the club, it also created a rift that would eventually lead to even more bloodshed. The power vacuum left by Roy's absence also had a ripple effect on the Hells Angels and their dealings with the Mafia. Roy had been a key player in managing their drug operations, particularly cocaine, and his murder left a significant void. The Rizzuto crime family, who had close ties to the Hells Angels, would soon face its own challenges as rival factions within the mafia began to seek more control. The murder of Roy was just one part of the ongoing power struggle that would eventually lead to the bloody Montreal Mafia War. For Roy's friends and allies within the Hells Angels, his death was a stark reminder of how treacherous the world they inhabited truly was. Roy had been a trusted figure, and his brutal murder was a signal that loyalty was everything. In the criminal world, even the most powerful figures weren't immune to betrayal, and Roy's end showed just how dangerous it was to cross the wrong people. Though his body was never found, Roy's death remains a defining moment in the history of the Hells Angels in Quebec. His disappearance continues to spark debates, theories, and speculation. Was his body really disposed of in a meat grinder? Did the mafia play a bigger role in his death than previously thought? These questions remain unanswered, but the truth is that Roy's life and death were intertwined with the dark, unforgiving world of organized crime. And while the mystery of Louis Roy's murder may never be fully solved, one thing is certain. His death left an indelible mark on Quebec's criminal landscape. It was a warning to anyone who thought they could defy the system, and it proved just how far the Hells Angels and the Mafia were willing to go to protect their power. The story of Louis Roy is one that continues to haunt the criminal world to this day. His disappearance, his brutal murder, and the power struggles that followed have left a lasting legacy on the Hells Angels and Quebec's criminal landscape. While Roy may have been silenced by his betrayal, his story is far from forgotten. Roy's death had a profound impact on the Hells Angels, especially in Quebec. His murder sent a clear message. Betrayal in the underworld is dealt with ruthlessly. But it also sparked a wave of distrust and tension within the club, one that would ripple through its ranks for years to come. After Roy's disappearance, the Nomads chapter, which he had helped build into one of the most powerful in Canada, began to fracture. The power struggle between rival factions within the Hells Angels escalated, with different members jockeying for control. The bloodshed that followed Roy's death was part of the larger ongoing conflict that plagued the Hells Angels for years. Outside the club, Roy's murder also had far-reaching effects. The ties between the Hells Angels and the Mafia, particularly the Rizzuto crime family, were thrown into disarray. Roy had been an important figure in managing the cocaine trade for both groups. His death left a power vacuum that was quickly filled by other players, leading to further chaos in the underworld. The relationship between the Hells Angels and the Mafia, once seen as an unbreakable alliance, began to fray, with different factions within both groups fighting for dominance. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of Roy's death is the mystery that surrounds it. Despite years of investigations and speculation, his body was never found, and the true details of his murder remain shrouded in secrecy. The story of Roy's final moments, whether he truly met his end in a meat grinder or was disposed of in some other way, continues to fuel rumors and theories. Some still believe that the Hells Angels and the Mafia covered up the crime to avoid further scandal, while others suspect there are even more dark secrets lurking behind the scenes. Louis Roy's life and death left an indelible mark on the world of organized crime. He was a man who built his empire through ruthlessness and cunning, but in the end, his own rules of loyalty and power led to his demise. His disappearance not only changed the course of the Hells Angels in Quebec, but it also reshaped the criminal world around him. Roy's story is a testament to the brutal, unforgiving nature of the criminal underworld, a world where power is everything and betrayal is never forgotten. It's a world where loyalty is tested at every turn, and those who fail to uphold it often pay the ultimate price. While his name may not be as well known as others in the world of organized crime, the impact of Louis Roy's life and death will continue to be felt for generations to come. His story is one of power, betrayal, and the ruthless reality of life within the criminal underworld.